Welcome, everybody. Is that volume okay? It sounds kind of loud. It's okay? Okay. Thumbs up? All right. Awesome. Thanks. Welcome to the Lawrence Hall of Science and this spring-summer Cultural Connections program. Wanted to say thank you to Cultural Connections for convening everybody together to give us a great opportunity to talk about what it is that we do here at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is UC Berkeley's Public Science Center. My name is Lauren Freeband, and I'm the Assistant Director of Marketing here, and I will be tonight's moderator. Here you can see the building, some of the view, and our general mission, which is pretty broad, to inspire and foster the learning of science and mathematics for all. So if you want to join in, you can use the hashtag CC at the Hall, or you can tweet directly to the Lawrence Hall of Science with @Berkeley Science, or to Cultural Connections with Bay Area Museums. We're going to have about an hour of presentation and then 30 minutes of Q&A, and we'll adjust according to how quickly we move through. Then, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Craig Strang, and he is an Associate Director here at the Hall. And take it away.
Great, well, thanks for coming, everyone. Welcome to the Lawrence Hall of Science at the University of California, Berkeley. I wanted to start, let's see if I know how to make this go. The cursor. Try and get the video play. Okay, so
to me, stepping into the shoes of a scientist means using something like this to find out something about how the world works.
Stepping into the shoes of an engineer, to me, means having a mastery of the materials I work with and making them do what I want them to do. Like this.
They might work together to build a model like this, embrace failure along the way because not everything goes right the first time.
Stepping into the shoes of a scientist means using our innate curiosity and our natural sense of wonder to explore the natural world.
Scientists get away with asking why all the time. They say, why do you say that? What's your evidence? And I wish more people liked those questions, because I like those questions.
My favorite thing about stepping into the shoes of scientists is getting to try new ideas without being afraid of failure.
Science is definitely something that's universal. It's something that everybody can get engaged in. Kids especially really want to learn it, they really want to do it, they really want to try it, they want to get their hands into what's going on so that they can truly understand it.
So, one of the things that characterizes Lawrence Hall of Science is that we have this pretty broad range of programs and ways that we engage the public. So it's always been a challenge for us to describe what we're all about and what our signature thing is. And one of the ways that we describe that now is that we help people to step into the shoes of a scientist or an engineer. So that's an example of how some of our staff describes what it is to step into the shoes of a scientist or an engineer. Okay. Again, things that really characterize or the features that really describe the hall are this range of programs that I'm going to try and share with you in 5 minutes or so, and then turn it over to my colleagues who will each go in depth into one of the particular areas that we're involved in. Another signature thing about the hall that's different than many science centers or museums is that we're part of the University of California, Berkeley. And that comes with a whole university culture that really has defined us since 1968 when we opened. And what that means is that we have access to working in direct partnership with faculty in the Graduate School of Education, in all the science departments, the engineering, the School of Engineering, the math departments, etc. So we have access to this incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise. It also means that as part of the University of California, we're really committed to not only delivering programs to our immediate audience, but to evaluating those programs, reflecting on them, and documenting them and sharing them with the rest of the field. So as part of UC Berkeley, we really feel a commitment to making a contribution to the entire field through publications and the dissemination of products of our work on a lot of different levels. So you'll see that coming through some of the aspects of what I'm sharing with you. In terms of the museum itself, what we call the Public Science Center, which is only one aspect of what we do here at Lawrence Hall of Science, we've really made an effort over the last several years to reach out beyond the walls of the museum, partly because we know that learning takes place anywhere and everywhere, all day long, 24/7, but also because we happen to be up on the top of the hill here that doesn't have great access for the public. So we're always trying to find ways to reach out into many different communities. So we have a much stronger presence, mostly thanks to Daryl, to delivering science and math learning through online systems and digital systems, but we're also sending a fleet of vans out into the community every day in libraries and community centers, and we've developed a number of different types of activities that people can do at home science learning kits that are available commercially and for free. A major area that Lawrence Hall of Science has been involved in since before our doors opened in 1968 is the design and development of instructional materials, curriculum materials that are used in schools all over the country and actually in many countries around the world. So we have this entire curriculum development shop that is downstairs below the level that any of the public ever really gets to see. And I think if you live here in Berkeley, it's likely that you identify the hall as a place where your kids go on a field trip with their school, or maybe a place that you take your own kids or your grandkids to on weekends or when it's raining. But as you go further and further away from Lawrence Hall of Science, when I travel, people say, "Oh, you have a museum too?" They're not even aware of our Public Science Center. They really know the hall as a curriculum development center. And we estimate that about 20 to 25% of all the students in the United States, kindergarten through 12th grade, use instructional materials that were developed at Lawrence Hall of Science sometime in their K-12 learning career. So we really pride ourselves on innovation and research-based materials that are pushing the limits and pushing the edge, but also materials that are actually usable and accessible and that can penetrate the market in a pretty significant way, 25% of all the kids in the country. So you're probably familiar with FOSS, GEMS, CPUP, some of the brand name instructional materials that have come from Lawrence Hall of Science over the years. Susie's going to talk more about that in one of our most successful current new programs that's really revolutionizing the way that schools are implementing next generation science standards. Another whole area of the hall that is not typical of every science center is that we have a research group, an educational research group that Rena leads, and she'll talk more about this later. But the research group not only helps us to evaluate our own programs and gather data for the iteration and improvement of everything that we do, instructional materials, professional learning programs out on the floor with our visiting public. But Rena also leads a huge portfolio of original research projects that really is driving the field and helping to improve what's known about how learners of all different ages come to understand science ideas. So she'll talk a little bit maybe about her activation lab, and maybe several years ago you remember the front page above the fold headlines in the San Francisco Chronicle that came from we call the Bay Area study, or the statewide study of science learning in California. And that really helped us to understand the low level of science instruction that's happening in California schools at the elementary level. The area that I lead at the Hall is related to professional learning of educators. And we've, for decades, done professional learning programs, designed and disseminated professional learning programs for classroom teachers and school administrators. But now we also have professional learning programs that work with informal educators in science centers, museums, aquariums around the country, with educators in outdoor science schools, and we're also working in a pretty significant way now, just in about the last 8 to 10 years, with scientists who are trying to improve their own ability to communicate with the public, to add education and outreach components to their research labs, and recently even we're working with a large group of scientists that are trying to improve their own undergraduate teaching. I mentioned Daryl leads our Center for Technology Innovation, and we've really been exploring ways to help students learn in the digital space, and not only to learn using other people's technology, but to actually be engaged in the design and development of technology themselves. And then finally, we have a portfolio of family programs that involve our programs going out into communities, our summer camps that take place here in the building and in various locations around the Bay Area. And then we also have programs for parents as educators to help parents to further their students' learning outside of school and outside of the walls of the museum. So this is the last thing that I'll just leave you with, that again, we're trying to document everything that we do and distribute it and disseminate it nationally to try and share our lessons learned with the rest of the field around the country. Okay, so that's the quick overview, and then my colleagues are going to go a little bit more in depth into each of those various sectors. Okay, Ingenuity, Monica.
I'm Monica Meyer. I'm the Director of Ingenuity Programs here at the Lawrence Hall of Science. So the Ingenuity Labs and the Ingenuity Programs belong to our private public science center, and it's a line of programs that currently comprise of 2 major programs, the Ingenuity Lab and Design Quest. And Design Quest is an exhibit, and they are major components of our community outreach and access efforts. The programs seek to foster curiosity, problem solving, and collaboration, and the grant has become a central initiative in the Public Science Center. We started off with the Ingenuity Lab that we launched in 2009 because we really wanted to have more participatory programs where the whole family can engage. So the Ingenuity Lab is a program that offers rotating engineering design challenges. It's open Saturdays and Sundays from 12 to 4, on holidays and during school breaks. And in the summer, the lab moves to the exhibit floor for the whole time during the summer. We serve about 62,000 people during the year, and the program is funded with generous support from Chevron. I'd like to read a quote to you by Mitch Resnick from the MIT Media Lab. In today's rapidly changing world, people must continuously come up with creative solutions to unexpected problems. Success is based not only on what you know or how much you know, but your ability to think and act creatively. The publication of the Next Generation Science Standard, or NGSS, for K-12 education highlights the importance of engineering design as a way for learners to understand the world around them. When students develop engineering habits of mind, they're not just learning how to pass a test. They're learning to make meaning out of the world around them. We can't predict what challenges the futures may hold, but by helping students develop engineering habits of mind, we can prepare them to meet these challenges and empower them to make the world a better place. So when we launched these programs, I don't want to read this whole list of goals, but we really had in mind to create a program with a cross-generational appeal where the whole family can engage in a meaningful way and make the connection to engineering. The core of the program is the the engineering design process. When engineers solve a problem, their first solution is really the best. Instead, they try different ideas, learn from mistakes, and try again. Visitors work like real engineers. The focus is on the process versus the outcome in the end. So as a team, they brainstorm ideas, they design, build and test, and redesign a prototype, and share their solutions. I want to show you a couple examples. So here, for example, we have the circuitry design challenges where visitors get to design, build, and test scribbling machines and set them off to leave some tracks on the paper. Currently, we also have an IMLS grant to focus more on how we can modify these programs to better meet the needs of young learners. We have the core audience in our public science center is 4 to 12, so we have a lot of really young kids coming in with their families. And we knew that it works, but the research showed that we could actually do better by making modifications for those young learners and giving them even lower entry points to get started in a kind of playful and easy way. And so, for example, here we created these circuit blocks where they can really start with simple introductions to circuitry before they actually design some scribbling machines. It gives them multiple entry points and pathways. Rockets is another really successful and popular design challenges. So visitors iteratively prototype in a collaborative environment to design, build, and test their rockets. So as visitors embrace risks and learn from the mistakes, it's really important that that's another important component of this programs that we also try to help them by facilitating that and guiding them along with asking open-ended questions to really help them when they get stuck and help them along the way. All the design challenges are open-ended, and visitors can design solutions from simple to more complex. And some design challenges we also develop with engineers from the university or with engineering students. So here on the right you see some PhD students from Ingenuity, which is an institute on campus where we design together a stormwater runoff design challenge. The lab is run by staff, UC students, volunteers, and teen interns. And like I said, they guide visitors through the design process. Parents play a really important role. We really want them to be very engaged with their children, and we see them as co-learners and science teachers in this process. The lab became really like an R&D space for a lot of other programs that we developed over the past 5 years since we launched this lab. So initially, we started to think about which design challenges can we take to turn them into a small exhibit, harden them and scaffold them up more and turn them into an exhibit. And out of this exhibit, we developed an extended exhibit that's now a 5,000 square foot exhibit. It will be up in its full iteration again in October. Right now, we have a smaller version of it up on the floor, so you can check it out later. We also developed camps, classes, and an engineering festival. So the design challenges in the lab were really a great kind of platform to start off. So we didn't have to start from scratch, but we already knew how it would work with visitors. With the IMLS grant that we currently do, we also developed a lot of programs for young learners and also a series of events. And then we have a mobile program out in Vallejo where we work a lot with public libraries, but also host some events in Vallejo in the Inventors Lab. I'd like to show you a couple pictures from Design Quest, but you can also check it out upstairs. So Design Quest is our new developed 5,000 square foot exhibit embedding key elements of the Ingenuity programs that are hardened into an interactive exhibit. And this exhibit was designed and fabricated in-house at the hall. So usually we have traveling exhibits, so this is something new for us to have a large exhibit that we designed and built in-house. And we really didn't want to be so dependent on traveling exhibits. So with having Design Quest, we can either have it out in its full iteration, or we can switch out things more often. The goal, the exhibit was, so our goal in the development of the exhibit was to create a space where visitors of all ages can come together as a community to participate in iterative design and gain personally meaningful learning experiences. So So here's a picture of Windworks, which is one of the components that's also currently up. So visitors can build wind turbines that are either turn wind into electricity or that generate mechanical power to lift weights. Design and Drive is an exhibit that's currently not up, so you can combine wheels and tracks to optimize Lego vehicles for climbing or for speed. Stop Motion Story is an exhibit that is up right now, so we have 3 stop motion exhibits where you can use simple props and backgrounds and create your own videos. And it is, when we have the full iteration up, we also have a make station, so visitors can also make their own props for the stop motion animation station or other areas. Research findings of the program are that Ingenuity programs effectively promote engineering habits of mind, and the results to date show behaviors of engineers and design thinking in participants. We also see really long stay times and high engagement levels, and also high levels of interactions between adults and children. The lessons learned over the past 5 years is for anybody who would like to start a makerspace or a lab space like this, I would recommend to think big but start small. So we started in a classroom that we actually used at the same time for workshops during the week. It's important because it's really also a shift in mindset that you get the buy-in from your organization. The facilitation is really the key to a good experience. That's what we learned over and over from our research. So investing in staff and ongoing training is really important. Be connected to your local, but also maybe your national network. We have a community of practice through Aztec. That's a very valuable resource. And also taking advantage of local resources is very helpful and can really bring down costs. So thank you, and here's my email if you have any questions.
Hello, don't be fooled by the fact that we don't have any pictures of really cute kids on our slides. We do really fun and exciting things too. So hi, I'm Raina Dorff. I'm the director of the research group here at the Lawrence Hall of Science. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kinds of work we do here today, and then welcome any further questions, discussions as we get into Q&A. So we do, let's call it 4 kinds of things. We do what we call research, we do evaluation, we design and develop assessments, and we do policy studies. Now these aren't really 4 exactly distinct things. Sometimes evaluation is a kind of research, and sometimes you do research to develop assessments, and a policy studies is also research. But these 4 areas kind of give you a sense of the range of kinds of activities we may engage in. But don't split hairs on the categories because it won't work very well. Some of the areas of expertise that we have include STEM education, informal and museum education, after-school and out-of-school time settings, maker spaces and engineering designs, the crossover or space in between and among formal and informal setting experiences. So when the kids from the school actually end up at a field trip in the science center or an informal space out in the wilderness, but they're there with their school classroom, or a museum or out-of-school program actually dives into a school setting. So we look at those spaces as really interesting opportunities for studying science learning and not thinking so that context is as defining as it often seems when you're in one of those settings. So we like to look at science learning no matter where it's happening and understand how kids make sense of science learning experiences in and across settings. And then we also have a very strong focus on equity in STEM education, and then on educational policy, so the way in which large-scale policies sort of construct the opportunities for STEM learning that happen in school, communities, societies, etc. I'm going to give you a couple examples of our work and then give you some explanation of how they kind of fit into the buckets I mentioned. So the California statewide study is one of the studies that Craig mentioned. It's a study we did around 2011, and what we did there was we looked across the state of California. We did surveys, case studies, and interviews to understand what kind of school experience students were having in science across California. So we looked at elementary, middle, and high in different ways. Elementary was our most in-depth. And we came out with a set of understandings about what typical kids in typical California schools have experienced in science learning, and also the range. So what's the very best look like, and what's the very worst look like, and everything in between. And in addition to helping us, Lawrence Hall of Science, and the community who does work in schools better understand what goes on in them and how to best design programs and implement things in those settings that would be helpful, it also really was a helpful policy study in that it was used in legislative hearings, and it was used in the media, and it was used in communities, it was used amongst lobbyists, etc., to really push on the fact that science learning opportunities were inadequate in California schools. The other piece of that was that we did the study right at the transition from the standards that we have had for a long time to the standards that would become next generation science standards. It was around the time that the framework was coming out that launched the standards development. And we were able to really help the community understand, was California ready for NGSS? Were people ready to accept and implement those standards well? The answer was no. There was a lot of work that needed to happen. And these kinds of lessons were really helpful to the landscape. In fact, I kind of joke often because I never, of all the work that we've done in the research group, there have been some that are way more fascinating, but this got like press, we were like on the radio, and I'm like, if I could have chosen what to be on the radio about, this bad news would not have been it. But it was one of our biggest, most just widely disseminated reports. The other work, which gives you a very different flavor of the kind of research work we do, is the activation lab work. Some of you may be familiar with it. But there we're studying the degree to which we can think about the kinds of skills, dispositions, and knowledge that position youth for success in science learning and lives long term. So we look at different kinds of dimensions of a construct we termed science learning activation. Those include fascination with natural physical phenomena, the competency belief in science, valuing science, and engaging in scientific sense-making. And we try to understand how like arming or positioning kids with a set of those kinds of knowledge, skills, and dispositions in kind of like their backpack that they can carry with them throughout from setting to setting supports them and enables them to succeed and engage in science learning. Both of these sets of work you can learn more about on our website, but I just wanted to give you an example of the flavor of something that's more like a research deep research project, and something that's more like a policy study. Also, the activation lab work has a lot of assessments that we developed through it. Those are also available on the website for all those dimensions that I spoke before about. Our work in evaluation is also pretty interesting. We may do any one of these kinds of activities or all of them for a particular project. This is probably the kind of work you guys are most familiar with that we do, because many of you we've engaged with as clients or partners in this. But so we often will clarify goals related to logic models, theory of action, experience development and improvement through front-end research, formative evaluation, program implementation evaluation, and then of course understanding impact. Our structure and funding is that we have within the hall work and we have beyond the hall work, and both of those are kind of funded by a combination of fund sources, grants are some of them, client contracts, revenue sources, you name it, we use it to learn new things. And then we have various roles, so within the hall and beyond, And we do independent services and projects, and we also do embedded and collaborative services and projects. We are also part of UC Berkeley. We have, it supports us, as you can imagine, being a research group. Being affiliated with UC Berkeley is a nice connection. So both for affiliation and reputation, also for partnerships on campus with faculty and with departments, and as well for the infrastructure and academic resources that provides for us. So that's basically all I'll say for today, and welcome further conversation in the future.
That's not me.
Sorry.
Such high energy. This is about the time of the day I'm falling asleep on BART. So I will try not to do that in front of you fine people. First off, because maybe I don't read all the emails I get, especially from Jonathan, I just want to make sure, how many of you guys work in museums? Just a little bit of information for me. Good. How many of you people are technology folks, developers, designers? So not many people will know when I'm totally lying about technology. So my name is Daryl Porcello. I am the CTO, also a director of the Center for Technology Innovations, one of the centers here at the Hall. We've heard from a couple other center directors already. I am responsible for most of the technology that comes out of the building. My group develops things in-house. We're pretty unique for a science museum to have such a large group and do a lot of our work here. We don't often work with vendors. We sometimes work with independent consultants, but for the most part, things are developed and designed here at the Hall. And that's been a great benefit because we try to understand often our clients, which are other museums or the Hall itself. We understand the environment and we work with really great people, and we get a lot of knowledge and experience from them. So today, I thought I'd talk a little about what we do, but drilling down very quickly into a specific project, because I didn't want to sort of fire hose you guys with everything we've possibly done in the many years that I've been here. So my group primarily is known for a couple projects that have been pretty successful on a national scale. And I'll talk about those just super briefly. And there are the two things on the top here. So howtosmile.org is a digital library for science and math hands-on activities, primarily for science museums, but any informal educator, in fact, any educator or even enthusiast. And it started with an NSF grant that was funded in 2007, and that's when I began working with my partner in crime here at the Hall, Sherry. She used to be at the Observatory. We've done a lot of projects together. This has been a really successful project, and it really taught us a lot about, say, elevating exemplars of wonderful experiences, especially for hands-on activities. NASAwavelength.org is another digital library that we created. This digital library has all of the educational resources from the Science Mission Directorate. That's the part of NASA that does most of the scientific research and a lot of the missions that you hear about, like Kepler, for instance, and the rover missions and things like that. It's actually a great organization, and it has a lot of educators working to create products, but up until a few years ago, they had essentially no index for this kind of stuff. So once again, working a lot on creating the informational structure to showcase great activities. We also do sort of, I think, what is called traditional technology in the museum. We create exhibits, we create experiences, we have programs where kids are learning about technology. Sherry has a very successful program called Tech Hive, which is on this floor but sort of behind us in what used to be the amphitheater here, where kids are actually sort of going through a maker-like experience, going through projects and internships to learn about technology. We also create great apps, great games, great educational games. We recently had one released called Monster Arithmetic. But today, I wanted to talk about a specific program that we call DIY apps. And this started with all of the work I talked about, giving us an interest in how can we scaffold some great science experiences where kids are stepping into the shoes of scientists, digging into research, thinking about observations and coming to conclusions themselves on their own, or maybe with their family, at home. How do we take what we know is really good work here, some of the activities that are developed by these fine peoples in their groups, some of the activities we know come from science museums, and really capture the essence of that, going beyond sort of a handout and actually structuring that experience at home. So we knew we had great materials, we had some really great topics we wanted to conquer, and we were very interested in creating apps. And we wanted to create an app that really showcased some of this good work. So this started the DIY app program, and so far we've had 4 apps going sort of counterclockwise from that big Bucky's ball in the sky there: DIY Nano, DIY Sun Science, DIY Lakes, and DIY Human Body. And these have all been really successful, and they've all been based off of different funding streams and different grants. I actually gave a snippet of this talk at a recent National Institutes of Health meeting, where we were talking about synergy of using federal funding to sort of grow a singular program, and this is what I chose to talk about. So these apps are actually really cool, and people in Rena's group have helped us test and evaluate these with families, and they've been really successful. And they're all sort of composed of the same elements, and you can see a little bit here with their front screens. They are a collection of activities that are wonderfully illustrated in both photography and step-by-step instructions, and then paired with the science explanation and connections to ongoing research. We also throw in some media, some videos, and some simulations, but I'll get to a little of that later. So what sort of makes these interesting and unique? Well, we spend a lot of time actually combing through activities and finding really great things. And because most of you guys have worked in museums, you know that stuff you find on the web doesn't always work right. So we do a lot of testing of these activities to make sure we're getting what we bargained for. And we create step-by-step instructions. We work with a wonderful photographer, take really good photos, and make it really easy for families to do these activities. We focus on activities with materials that you pretty much can get at Safeway for really low cost. Each activity, going to sort of that upper right corner there, has a clear, what we call metadata profile. They know the age of the person that would sort of most enjoy this experiment or be able to do this, how long it's going to take. It really gives people upfront information to know this is what I should be doing with my kids, or even kids to understand, oh, this might be appropriate for me. Like I said, we also connect to the science, so the various topics, there's many connections. I put an example here of what's in your blood. So once again, standing on some of the shoulders of the great work here done in curriculum development, we take some of the essence of those scientific explanations and boil it down for these apps and make it readily available for people going through these experiments. So essentially they have everything they need. They have instructions, they have photography to guide them, they have a connection to the science, and sometimes even a connection to research. In DIY Science, or Sun Science, we connected some of those experiments to actually satellites in the sky. And I'll show you a little bit about that in an upcoming slide. Also, some of the last few things we've had have been in Spanish, so that's been great. Just to do a little bit of background in some of the funding for this. So DIY Nano was 2012-2013. It was an NSF funded. That came from the Nanoscale Informal Science Education Network. It actually was the first one we did, and it was a wonderful way to explain what this really powerful network that I know some of you are part of, because I just saw you at the meeting in St. Paul, we're doing in the museums to teach nanotechnology. And that's where sort of the DIY idea was born. We continued with DIY Sun Science, which was funded off a NASA grant I had about heliophysics. And this is where we really sort of hardened the template. And we kept going with DIY Human Body, which was funded from an NIH grant I had. That was the first time we actually put an app in Spanish. And DIY Lakes, which had some interesting narration and animation. And these apps have been pretty successful. So there was something in the beginning that said we've had over 200,000 downloads of apps. That's more like 500,000 now. These are all found on the iTunes store, the App Store. And we're really happy with how they've been received. And this is the downloads we have to date. And they're all free, of course. And just a couple last things to tell you sort of how we brought some of the technology back into these apps, and they're not just explanations of activities. So this is probably our favorite example of how we really baked in what's possible in a tablet with an internet connection. This actually is a download of a live image from SDO, which is the Solar Dynamics Observatory, a satellite orbiting the sun. And kids can go in and look at relatively live images of the sun. It takes a few minutes to get here. And look at it through different wavelengths to see some of the differences in the sun and reveal some actual components that would not normally see just looking at the sky or your telescope or looking at visible light. So you can see some of the coronal mass ejections, some of the cool flares and things that we wanted kids to be able to observe. Also, what I like about this is you are able to see live images and see sunspots and compare it to an activity where you're actually measuring sunspots. So a great marriage of technology and some of the activities. And in the Airway Lakes, we did a similar thing where maybe you can't go to a lake, but you can do a simulation about how deep the lake is or what the temperature is. So once again, just a really nice marriage of some of the technology that's possible on these handheld devices in partnership with something that we do really well here at the Hall, which is science experiments and experiences for kids and families. So that's it for my talk, and it's perfect timing because I'm losing my voice up here, and we'll move on to our last speaker.
I'm the director of the middle school curriculum team in the Learning Design Group here at the Morningside Hall of Science. And I'm curious, Daryl asked you about where you're from, how many of you work or have an institution that in some way does work with curriculum or creates materials for schools? So quite a few people, great. Craig actually did a nice job of already introducing some of the history of curriculum development at the Hall, so I'm going to skip over that a little bit. But as he mentioned, it's been part of our mission since we opened in 1968. There's a whole crew of us down in the basement who never see the light of day or the museum, but are working on materials for schools. And we have a broad range of curriculum programs out there that he already alluded to. One thing I wanted to make sure I mention is our curriculum materials are not just for in-school formal learning. We do also have programs for after-school science, so that might be something that's interesting to some of you. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the project that my group works on, which is a project to develop K-8 middle school science curriculum. We're working with a commercial publisher called Amplify Science, and we're developing curriculum that's designed for the next generation science standards and uses innovative use of technology. So one of the things I understood that some of you might be interested in is how technology is involved in STEM learning, as Daryl already spoke nicely about. And so in the context of our project, I wanted to talk about 3 of the ways we're trying to use technology in curriculum development that I'm really excited about and that I think have great potential. So one of those ways is through the development of simulations. The second is using technology to support formative assessment and differentiation. And then finally, taking advantage of technology to increase the power of a teacher's guide to support teachers through multimedia. So part of our curriculum model is the idea that kids should learn everything through multiple modes. So we call it the do it, talk it, read it, write it approach. And the truth is, though, that there are lots of concepts that it's really very difficult for students to actually do, to experience directly, especially when you get into middle school science, because they're too slow, or they're too small, or they're too dangerous, or they're too expensive for there to be a real hands-on experience. You can't see what's happening inside your cells, you can't observe molecules moving, you can't experiment with the Earth's climate and see what happens, and you can't wait around for natural selection to take place and observe it. And those are all things that we need to teach middle school science students about. And so that's where the idea of digital simulations comes in. And we think, and are getting some evidence to support the idea, that a well-designed simulation can give kids the same kind of experience of exploration and discovery that they can get from a hands-on investigation. And so it really extends the range of phenomena that kids can engage in this kind of doing experience, even if it's not an actual physical hands-on doing. So that's what we're trying to do. These are screenshots from 4 of the sims that we are in the process of developing with our publisher. So clockwise from the top left, it's a unit on metabolism in the human body, a unit on natural selection, a unit on climate change, and a unit on phase change. So these are all simulations that the students use multiple times over the course of the unit to learn and discover different things. The second, I think, really important use of technology in curriculum is to support formative assessment and differentiation, which I think are 2 of the biggest challenges that teachers face, especially secondary teachers who have 150 students, to try to actually know what their kids know and then customize instruction for them is almost impossible in that situation. And so this is where we really think we have to help teachers more with technology. Where possible, what we're doing in our curriculum is capturing and automatically scoring student responses and then presenting those results to the teacher and then offering easily selected or automated customization for the students. And in particular, one thing we're working on is trying to develop richer formative assessments than sort of what you would normally think of as auto-scorable multiple choice questions. So the screenshot there is from something we call a modeling tool, which is basically like a graphic interface that the student can drag things and select things to represent their ideas, in this case about how molecules move through the human body in digestion and cellular respiration. And then under the hood, this tool actually analyzes and scores the student response and then presents that in a useful way to the teachers to tell them something about what the kids understand or don't understand. So we're trying to give the kids something that they can do that actually feels a little bit like what a real scientist does, making a model, but then provides formative assessment information to teachers. And then last but not least, we'd like to use technology to try to make it easier for teachers to understand how to teach the curriculum. The photo on the left shows a teacher that looks very happy, but she's carrying this huge binder, which is sort of our old method of developing curriculum. That's just one of our binders from Seeds of Science Roots of Reading. But the fact of the matter is that the binder weighs 9 pounds, and it's not very flexible, and it's only got print, and we found that teachers need more rich and more flexible support for teaching our materials. For example, one of the things that teachers have found challenging with the implementation of the next generation science standards is teaching scientific argumentation. So it's a whole new approach to teaching science, and we found it particularly difficult to convey in a text teacher's guide that this is how you would set up this discussion and get your kids to engage in argumentation. And so we're working on a project funded by the National Science Foundation to develop a multimedia teacher's guide that includes video and other multimedia resources that can better convey to teachers what we mean by the lesson designs that we're presenting and how they could look in a real classroom, the kinds of things that kids say, and what the discussion looks like. And we're studying this intervention right now in a research study. We'll know more by next year whether or not teachers actually learn more from it. But we think that this is a way that technology can be used to make curriculum materials more supportive of teachers. So, in conclusion, in our approach to curriculum development, we think that the thoughtful and innovative use of technology has great potential, making teachers work easier and increasing student learning and engagement. And I think, obviously, the emphasis there is on the word thoughtful, because there's lots of ways to go wrong with technology as well. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to everyone who came for good listening skills. So now we're going to start a Q&A. We have about half an hour, so we're going to try to keep responses from the panel to a max of 2 people per question. More if we have time, or if there's something super, super important that needs to be said. And then you can either ask your questions directly to the panel, or if it's a general question, you can ask me, and I will suggest a person to answer. So, any questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit more about platform choices related to what teachers and students can be using? I noticed a lot of Macs at the table, and I noticed a lot of iOS apps you guys have developed. And what is your thinking around sort of accessibility for people who are maybe classrooms who don't have Macs, or classrooms that aren't as tech-enabled, or families that use different kinds of computers?
It's a great question. I don't know if I need this. Okay. I know we're not recording this, right, with this mic, so okay, good. I'm pretty loud. It's a super good question. I've had recent conversations about this. So a couple things. All the DIY apps I showed were iOS. We have a really great relationship with Apple, and some people in this room know there's a lot of apps out there, a lot, and people struggle with exposure. And that App Store has worked with us very closely to highlight and showcase our apps as free educational content. Developers also are very keen to develop for iOS because honestly it's where the money is for them. Of course, everyone knows that the market share is much bigger for Android, and we are trying more to do that, and the way we've been working with it more is using Unity. Unity is a great game developer platform, but it's a wonderful way to port both Android, iOS, and even Windows if you want to, from a single code base. So I agree we should be more open to that, but I think using things like Unity, another example is HTML5, which never really panned out for developers, but it's a balance of many factors. One being exposure, especially when you're trying to push a free app or show your funders that it's getting publicity. What developers want to do, which often is iOS, but it's also the ease. And I think more and more, especially some of the later games like Monster Hunter, we've been pushing towards Unity and other things like Titanium. I could go on for that, but I think other technology people in the platform.
Susie, do you want to comment?
Well, I'll say one thing that we've experienced in our several years of collaborating with our commercial publisher. They started out deciding we were going to make an iPad-based curriculum. We use only iPads, and then they switched to Android only, and then they realized that neither of those was going to work, and now it's browser-based and platform-independent, and that's causing all kinds of extra work to do all the stuff we did before. So yeah, they realized that it's too narrow. They needed, what schools use is there's huge variation, and couldn't make something that only used in one certain context.
I'd be happy to talk more after if you want.
Yes, in the blue.
Is there something like a DIY for math, or like an app for math, or anything?
We have a lot of math activities within howtosmell.org. They haven't really worked in a DIY sense because I've seen some better apps. I was at a couple years ago, at a serious gaming convention. And there's actually really cool things people are doing with math that are beyond sort of text-based, with actually really great gamification. So we don't have anything in DIY yet in the series, but it also doesn't lend itself as much as I would like it to.
Flannery?
Hi. Hey, I have a question. So for the research group, how is that what you're actually researching? How that being implemented? Where's like you have it for what you're doing, but where's like the how? How is that being integrated?
So is your question, how does the research that we do get integrated into practice? Is that?
Yes.
So there are almost as many answers to that question as there are projects that we've done. So we have about somewhere between 40 and 60 projects running at any given time. So I'll give you a couple examples. So, you know, in cases where we're doing a research partnership or an evaluation partnership with a program that's actually being implemented, we often have a very tight feedback loop, especially if we're doing formative work with them, to try and help inform decisions that are being made about program tweaking, implementation, etc. as it happens. Any of my colleagues here could tell you a little bit about how that works, because we've worked with all of them at one time or another in that capacity to really try and help make sure that what we're learning in real time can influence real life decisions that they need to make. So that's just in the sort of by design way. In some of the applied research work that we're doing, like the activation lab work, there are a couple different ways that the research ends up supporting the practice. So one is that by design, that work is kind of an iterative and interactive communication between designers and researchers and implementers. And so as we learn something about what kind of features of learning experiences support activation, we share it with the field as quickly as we can in various ways. As we have assessments that help the field or people in the field actually understand the kinds of outcomes that they're getting in a particular program, we share those for people to use, and we help them use them in particular ways. And then, you know, we also have worked with designers to say, like, you have to work with us to help us understand how would you design something if you wanted to increase fascination in science, or how would you design something if you wanted to increase scientific sense-making amongst the participants. And that something can be like anything from in school to out of school to in the home or whatever. So those are some of the other ways. I'm trying to think of another example would be
Is there anyone in particular at the hall that happened where you guys did a research-based project, and then through that research you thought, oh, this is really this better, and then it was implemented here, and then there was like a change in how people interact?
Yeah, does anybody, one of you want to talk about something like that? You want me to?
Well, I mean, I don't think it might not be as elegant as what you're going after, but Rena's group has helped a lot with formative assessment for many of our projects, and specifically with our websites. And we did a lot of iterative tests, which were super helpful, that the designers started to really appreciate the input that Rena's group could give us. So it was a lot of usability testing that it mostly boiled down to, and a lot of sort of speak aloud testing and getting some of that observation to help tweak how the technology was changing sort of their workflow within the application. So that was super helpful for us.
Craig could also speak to that.
Well, I can tell stories from every project that I've ever worked on, because Rena's group has helped to improve really every project that we have. I lead one project here at the hall called Bayside. We're working with 10 school districts around the Bay Area, helping them to implement the next generation science standards and generally to improve their capacity for supporting high quality science instruction K through 12. So we're working with school districts, we're meeting with district superintendents, science coordinators, assistant superintendents, etc., and helping them to think through what do they need to do to improve their science program. And we'd ask them, so what are you doing in your elementary program? And they'd say, well, we do FOSS. Well, what does doing FOSS mean? And they'd say, well, we have all the materials, they're out there in our schools, we're sure teachers are teaching the FOSS program. Well, Rena's Bay Area study let us know that the average elementary school teacher in the Bay Area was teaching science for less than an hour a week. And we know that it probably takes 3 or 4 or 5 hours a week to do FOSS. So when a school district thinks that they're implementing a program but really they're only implementing 20 or 25% of the program, their solutions for how to improve the program are completely different. So the actual data, the actual information, not what a superintendent thinks or a principal hears from their teachers, but actual hard data about what's going on in classrooms radically changed the solutions that we were able to provide and propose to school districts for improving their programs. And it caused the schools to think completely differently about how they organize their school day. If they're only able to provide 20% of the time that's necessary to address the standards that they think they're supposed to be implementing. And it really was a game changer. It really shifted the conversation that we had once we had some evidence. To tell them, no, actually you're not. Sorry, you're not. It's not possible that you're doing something that no other school in the Bay Area is able to do. But it really moved the process forward in helping school systems to think about how they organize professional learning, assessments, the Bell schedule at their schools, a whole variety of sources of infrastructure that support science learning.
And I will just add that the loop that you talked about is something that happens in many projects in a very tight way. One of the things that's an advantage to being, we're kind of a hybrid because some of our work is like an external consulting firm and some of our work is an internal institutional research group. And so for the internal group, like having immediate and direct access, we're all here because we want our research to immediately matter. We're not, that's why we made the choice to work in a context like this. And my group has quite a number of people who are very dedicated to research connected with practice. But that said, there's also work that we do in research partnerships and evaluation partnerships with external clients that are just the same way. And depending on what the client is looking for and what the project demand will depend on how tight that loop is of feedback of information to decision and design.
Thank you. Great, thorough answer. Yes, in the blue shirt.
I'm interested in how you navigate the tension to sort of offering learners a lot of structure and sort of instruction and ensuring that they kind of succeed and make progress. And on one end, and on the other end, offering kind of enough open-endedness that they can really discover things for themselves and kind of follow their own sort of inquiry and interest. And in particular, like I was thinking about Daryl, we were talking about the DIY apps, like talking about good instructions, but then also activities and experiments. And Monica, we were talking in the Ingenuity lab about, it sounded like a lot of kind of open-ended sort of maker stuff, but also there's kind of this engineering, cycle that we want kids to sort of understand and inhabit. Can you just talk a little bit about how you navigate that tension and how you think about the materials that you create?
Well, I would say our program is kind of a hybrid between like a tinkering space in the Observatory and maybe a challenge-based space like Museum of Science in Boston, where they have like a pretty defined like challenge, and within that challenge, almost like a competitive setting, but it's not very open-ended. Ours, I feel like, is more like a hybrid where we have an overarching challenge, but let's say in hydraulics, we ask people to design a hydraulic system to move something. So it's pretty open-ended. They can decide what they move. They can decide if they want to lift something, push or pull something. It's a goal, kind of set the stage, but they can still design something that's meaningful to them and that they have ownership over. And the engineering design process, we are still using the one from Boston, but I think we would maybe modify it a little bit, so we haven't had the time to do that. I think the sharing is also another important aspect that is not in that design process, but definitely the process is core of what we do, and it's definitely not a linear process. So when we started designing an exhibit, it was also an interesting process we went through as a team. So working with the research group also helped us to realize, what the environment needs, what the materials need, and that back and forth between researchers and practitioners and the exhibit team and everybody who was involved really helped us to make the best out of it. And it's still like a process that we are still learning every day.
So can I just ask, so how do you bring the engineering process into it so that learners kind of get that that's what's happening here? Or do you? Like, to what extent is that visible to learners?
Well, we try to make it visible. We try not to have too much signage out. We have certain signage out, so maybe 1 or 2 signs where you see the engineering design process. We also have engineering students in the lab that talk about it. People stay a minimum of 20 minutes. A lot of people stay for an hour or longer and might come back in the same month again. So there's a lot of time to have a conversation with somebody. And if they talk to an engineering student, it automatically comes up. And we also train the facilitators to bring up the engineering process and talk to the visitors that that's actually what's happening to really make them aware of that they actually work like an engineer too.
I'll just add something to that, because that was one of the things that came out early in the studies we were doing, that people were doing activities, but not necessarily attaching what they were doing to engineering. And so something as simple as one of the Cal engineering students wearing a button saying, "Ask me, I'm a Cal engineer," sort of just raised the awareness like, oh, this is engineering, and just different ways of adding that label in so that people could attach, the experience they were having to a label, which has its pluses, and issues too. But it was really a helpful and easy way to help connect that.
And making a connection to engineering in the real world. So when we do hydraulics, for example, we have on the back counter, we have pictures of hydraulic machines. So automatically, without us even saying much, a conversation comes up by kids asking, oh, how does this relate? Or they compare their machine that they designed to the real world machines. And so there's actually really nice conversations coming up.
I can give you an easy answer. I would personally never have a purely open-ended experience on an app with the same goals I had in mind for the DIY series. I think in the app environment, unlike these environments that Monica and Rena talked about, it's extremely different. If you're going to have an open-ended experience in an app that says, think about this or try this on your own, there are a billion things to compete with that kid's attention right on that tablet. And I'm interested in having a good, solid experience potentially with a member of their family or themselves that would then inspire them to look further and maybe dive deep into some of the other resources the app is connected to. But I would be fearful of having only an open-ended experience and not some scaffolding to get where I wanted to get. And what some of the research showed, which is families sometimes needing structures, parents needing structures for their kids to go through experiments and activities. So tension, yeah, we sort of made a decision, at least with that series.
So are the activities not very open-ended? They're on the apps?
There are definitely ways you can take the activities, and sometimes we give optional pieces to go. But we like to walk through with curriculum developers and to test the activities and then keep them intact on the app. We attach them sometimes to videos. Some of the simulations I showed that kids could maybe use as a launching point for their own investigations or their own questioning. But the app is really a great introduction and scaffolding for that topic, and sometimes to create a collaborative experience with multiple people.
In the black shirt. Yeah, you.
So talking about simulations and the technology and the simulations in the curriculum as well, how much overlap is there between where you want to DIY apps are and bringing them into the classroom?
So I actually have a comment on that as well. So, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So this is more of a marketing thing, but Science Friday, which is a weekly radio show, they approached us for their education program, where they're working with teachers in classrooms, and they wanted some of our sun prints. So everyone's probably familiar with sun prints. And I said, oh, but we have DIY Science app, and they loved it, because they have the reach and they have the access to real scientists. We also do that through UC Berkeley, but what they were lacking was the content. So they were very excited to take DIY Sun Science into the classroom. So they just did their Explain the Sun campaign, and they had 20 classrooms sign up to use it and do the activities and report back to Science Friday about what they learned. And then, you know, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of people who are following along, and some of those people are probably teachers who thought about using that app in their classroom to join that project. So that was a cool partnership that happened there. Susan?
I mean, they're separate projects and development efforts. We have pretty different audiences and constraints. I think we're sort of our classroom-based creating a curriculum that addresses full NGSS, so we have to design simulations that address these 18 different topics and things like that. So it's a little bit of a different parameters.
Yeah, we also have a different audience in being that sometimes it has to look very sexy or don't download it, right? And Apple. Yeah, forced, demanded to. But there are different constraints, and even when Susie was putting some stuff up there, I could tell sort of the language and what you're saying, some of the challenges, and I think it was going to apply to me. But I'm not quite sure. There are some things that we had to do to push it forward to the general audience that we wanted. Luckily, and this is I think what we share, often the activities come from the hall or come from other similar science museums that have a really strong ethic and often look at NGSS and other standards for a basis for creating their activities. So I think they have a good solid spine of science content, but I think we would both agree that we want them to be sort of highly engaging and cause inquiry and really stimulate people and think about these topics. So that we share sort of being from the same institutional DNA.
Yes?
So question about the next generation of science standards. From what I've seen from their presents an approach, and also it's quite specific in the topics that it covers, so there isn't as much around specific activities. So I'm wondering, among the states that are piloting these standards, how you're working with teachers and how you're coordinating, developing different activities to meet the standards, and whether trips to the museum, simulations, classroom experiences, do they all meet the topics? Do they all count in addressing standards?
Well, there's a lot of questions there. There are 13 states that have adopted NGSS already. There are more that will. But in addition to those 13 states, there are several other states that have developed their own state science standards that are almost identical to NGSS, but they won't call them NGSS because that would be communist or something. So NGSS, even though some people are saying, wow, there's only 13 states, but really NGSS is driving the conversation about the reform and improvement of science, learning, and teaching nationwide in every state, even in Texas. So I think it's here to stay, and it is causing all of us to rethink the way that we're presenting science learning in all of our different settings. And I think that the standards represent more than just topics that need to be addressed at different grade levels. They really represent a very different approach to teaching and learning. And there's a very strong statement within NGSS that students should be learning the science concepts by engaging in science and engineering practices. That the practices formerly known as process skills or inquiry skills are not separate from the content in any way. They are the delivery mechanism for understanding the content. So what that means for science museums and informal experiences, I think, is that if we want to claim that we are helping schools to achieve the vision of NGSS, And even go a step further and say that our experiences are essential and central to achieving the vision of NGSS. I think that we all need to step up our game a bit. That we can't just do the same science experiences and blow something up and have kids explore something and think it's cool and oh wow, or get a lecture and a PowerPoint presentation, whatever it is that we've all been doing that's been great and successful for many years. We can't keep doing the same thing and make the claim that this is in the spirit of NGSS. I think it's really different, and in previous waves of new standards, reform, and implementation, I think a lot of us in the informal environment took what we were doing and correlated it to the new standards and just like checked off, here are the things we do that are in the standards. And this is a whole new universe. And I think we really need to rethink what we do and why we do it and how we do it and try and gather some evidence about the impact that our programs are actually having on kids and their understanding of science concepts. So all that said, like that's kind of the, you know, challenging part of it. On the other hand, I think that a trip to a museum, a week in residential outdoor science school, a field trip to a state park or national park, a day at the Exploratorium, I think it's possible to achieve more in those one-off experiences than you could achieve in weeks of classroom science instruction. And in particular in the context where we know that, like, you know, in California currently it's about an hour a week at the elementary level, spending a day in a science museum is like 2 weeks worth of science instruction. And a week at residential environmental ed camp is like a semester of science instruction. So the opportunity is huge, and the opportunity to make a case that we have what schools need to achieve this ambitious vision, I think it's real, but we also can't take it for granted. We have to really up our game a bit.
I also just want to point you to a resource that I co-authored a white paper, let's call it, for NARST, which is the National Association for Research and Science Teaching, with John Falk and Jonathan Osborne, and it's on the NARST website, and it's about the informal response to NGSS, or response from. So that may be, it's short, but it may offer some ideas as well.
Mina, is that on our NGSS website?
I do not know, but it should be, right?
Yeah.
Version 2 of the website will have.
Sure.
So I know that there's a lot of institutions who are working on trying to make model lessons, things that align with DSS. And a lot of the institutions are also waiting for what is the assessment going to look like. Have you done any work yet on thinking about what your assessment might look like?
Yes. Because we have to develop assessment curriculum and we can't play around NGSS assessment piece. So we are working on three-dimensional, we call three-dimensional assessment, meaning, you know, we're supposed to be assessing content and practices and precedent concepts. It's really hard. I don't think we're going to completely succeed at it with our modest project. I think we're going to do a little bit better at less rigorous formative assessment for practices and cross-cutting concepts. We're trying to be more diagnostic and, you know, do real measurement of the concepts. But and we're trying to develop some tools like the modeler tool that I showed that potentially could be allowed to do some assessment of practices like modeling. But we're doing the best we can. It won't be perfect.
There's also projects going on to try and build model assessments for what these would look like. This is like a stumper for the measurement community in science education. So everyone's like scratching their head. A little bit easier, if you can imagine, to do it embedded in curriculum than it is actually to do the summative assessments that would be the kinds of staple tests that people are looking for. There are people working on them. Nobody's feeling like they're going to crack the nut anytime soon. And the unfortunate reality is that the way this goes, the test will have to be out way before the technology of assessing them well will be ready. So we'll see.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. Flannery? Or yes, how about you? You have an answer. Ask the question yet.
So Daryl, you mentioned that one of your projects you were excited about because it was offered in Spanish. And I was just curious in what other ways the hall is addressing the language issues, maybe not so much for the school kids, but for the families, for the parents, to get engaged and be able to help learn and instruct their children.
I wish we would have more bilingual on the floor, but we don't. We do have some programs through our Public Science Center that we offer to the community that are taught bilingual, especially the early childhood department. There's a few programs that are taught by Spanish teaching teachers. And we do have a few Spanish teaching teachers, so depending on if a special request comes up, we would be able to do that.
I could just say a teeny bit about some of the Spanish apps that I presented. I don't know, it's so fun to talk to a microphone. So that, though I'm very happy it happened, that came out of a partnership with Children's Oakland because they were adamant that what we created in partnership with them had to be in Spanish given their population. So I'm very happy that resulted, and luckily we've worked with someone for a very long time that we knew that brought the translational abilities in to do that, and it was really hard. It was really hard to make sure it was all right and it fit. In technology, someone's probably a Spanish speaker in this room, we often have an issue because Spanish is usually about 50% longer when it comes to written text, and it becomes difficult to squeeze it in, and there's a lot of redesign and things that have to happen. But we were excited. I think it was really important that we had faith and trust in our partner, because so much of what we do in our apps, especially in the games, relies on humor and character and narrative, and that's not something you can get through Google Translate. So we highly value it, and I agree with Monica. I wish we did it more here, but it is something that takes effort and resources.
The other thing I just want to mention is that we talk mostly about our public science programs that come up here, but actually we serve about 125,000 kids out in the community at schools through our RAN and mobile programs. And so in those cases, we're very careful that in the communities we go, we make sure that the language is appropriately handled. So depending on what community we're in and where we're going, will depend on what kind of staff we bring, what kind of materials we bring to ensure that that community is best served. When people come up here, they often get mostly English, but when we go out to them, we make sure they get what they need in their site. And often, most of the communities that we're working with that are not English speaking are the ones we're serving actually in their community. So just another wrinkle in the discussion.
All right, so we are out of time. So thank you for answering some questions. So just a couple announcements. At either door, you can, well, we'll exit through the door that's open. Naja is going to have a survey about this program that you can take and fill out anytime between now and the end of the program. And you can give your filled out survey to anybody wearing a Cultural Connections name tag, or Naja herself. And you can make your way upstairs. There's some refreshments and happy hour type stuff outside in our Forces That Shape the Bay exhibit. And you can see more of the exhibits and catch the sunset, or as it sets. It starts to set. Thank you, everyone.